Hi, I'm Eric Dewey.
And this is Steve O'Mooney.
And I'm Matthew Renfro.
And we're Socially Awkward. You're listening to another great production on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. Check out more shows at foureyedradio.com. Hey there, Eric here from Socially Awkward Studios, and this Four-Eyed Radio presentation is being proudly brought to you by Raven Designs, illustration and design that fit your personality. For samples and inquiries, visit ravencruise.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my web 007.
For England, James.
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley, from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey of Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. This is a show where we discuss all things James Bond 007. And tonight we're going to be discussing locations. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the venues that have been used by James Bond, the villains in Bond movies, and the places that they just happened to be when stuff went down. Yes, it's location, location, location.
It's the most important thing, right?
Well, if you ask a real estate agent, yes, it is.
In Bond movies, it may not be the most important thing, but it certainly is an important thing, especially when they do it really well. There's some places that are just fantastic venues for Bond and his bad guy buddies to really go to town. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give our lists of our favorite top 15 bad guy hideouts, or villainous lairs, however you want to term it, and our top 15 of our friendly and or neutral venues and locations. And we're going to throw in a few of our picks for ridiculous locations as well, just for good measure.
Yeah, and one thing that is worth noting is the definition of what's what. A villainous venue is something that was definitely owned and controlled by the villain. A friendly venue is something that was definitely owned and controlled by either James Bond or his allies. A neutral venue is something that was neither owned nor controlled by either party, or at the very least, both parties had the same amount of control over it, and therefore it was just kind of ground that was there that they're both at. Now, a villain might be hosting something at a neutral site, but hosting something doesn't mean you control it.
Exactly.
So just because you have a party at the hall, you don't own the hall.
What? Dang it. I guess I better pack up my stuff and leave, huh? Dang it.
Yeah, probably.
So how do we want to kick this off?
Well, of course, we decided to go with ridiculous and good stuff. So let's start with some ridiculous stuff. And I'm thinking at the moment, let's start with the most ridiculous neutral venue. What did you have for your most ridiculous neutral venue, sir?
For me, the most ridiculous venue that was a neutral place, and some might argue that this location was in the control of the villains, but I still count it as a neutral place because they were there, but they didn't own it, and yeah, they may have rented it out, but I still don't put them in complete control of it, and that is the Perla de las Lunas Hotel from Quantum of Solace. The whole thing, it was basically just there to blow up. They made a big thing about, oh, look at this hotel. It's got all these hydrogen cells. They're so unstable. Oh, okay, so we're going to see this blow up in about 20 minutes. Oh, nope, 5 minutes. Okay. It was there just to be blown up. And, yeah, they blew it up all right. They blew it up good.
They really did. And just to keep the conversation going, I also have as my most ridiculous neutral venue the Palace de las Dunas Hotel from Quantum of Solace. In a Travel Channel sense of the term, And in fact, I have seen this place on the Travel Channel.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was on Bourdain's show. It was on somebody else's, but still. I look at this place and I'm thinking, on a Travel Channel show for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it'd be all right. Especially because then there will be guests there. People. It would be lived in. But no, when we see it, it's just this boring place out in the middle of the desert. And the only reason you could possibly want to go here is for the ability to be surrounded by nothing. I'm assuming they have amenities in the hotel, but you never get to see them. Mm-hmm. It's just a whole lot of brown that's extremely flammable.
Yep. Yeah, it just seems really boring. Like, I understand the idea of it, and might be a cool place to visit once, but I don't even know if I'd want to stay the night there. It doesn't look that interesting. I mean, most of the time you go to a resort, you go for everything that not only the resort has to offer, but everything that the location around it has to offer as well. This, you don't get that. You get just the resort. You don't get a beach. You don't get other buildings to go to. There's no indication that they have any kind of concert hall or showroom, anything like that. It really just looks like a fancy hotel, and I don't understand the appeal. And I thought it was a lame place
And if it was even partially decorated, I mean, anything, but no, it's just brown. Lots and lots of brown. It's like it was decorated by the most unimaginative architect ever. And Carson needs to go to this place, is what I'm thinking.
They need to look visit
this place is boring as hell.
Yes. Yeah, I don't understand, like, okay, I get it, earth tones, okay, they can be classy, yes, but you're in the middle of the desert. You're surrounded by earth tones. Brighten it up a little bit. Do something to differentiate the inside from the outside.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to have a place in the middle of the dunes, you'd want a greenhouse. I mean, just really contrast this place. And, you could even advertise it, combine that with your kitchen. We grow our own fresh greens out in the middle of this godforsaken desert. So you can have a really fresh salad. I mean, I'm not a salad person myself, but, I can see that as a point, in its favor if they had one. But instead we have walls that explode quickly.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to have exploding walls, you want the best, quickest, most explodingest walls that you can get. And the Perlas de las Lunas has it all.
It does. And I do have to give a dishonorable mention to one more neutral venue that would have made this list if not for Quantum of Solace. And that was the nameless redneck titty bar from License to Kill. What the hell was this doing in a Bond movie? Just rednecky country. I mean, yeah, it wasn't quite a strip club, but it might as well have been, and probably would have been if we'd gone a little later at night. Just, Bond doesn't belong here. The Bottoms Up Club in Man with the Golden Gun, which he never actually walked into, but at least something like that. It's in a locale, okay, I can buy it, but Bond, honky tonk, titty bar, no. Just doesn't work for me.
It was kind of obtrusive. It takes you out of the moment, and I hate that in movies when you have something that takes you out of the moment. And that was a movie that just couldn't afford to have you take it out of the moment. You really needed to be in it, and that's a bad sign. So I agree. Good dishonorable mention.
Yeah. So, what about your pick for the most ridiculous friendly venue?
For the most ridiculous friendly venue, I had to go with R/Q's laboratory in Die Another Day.
Me too. We agree.
Besides the obviousness of the Aston Martin calls it the Vanquish, we call it the Vanish. I was like,
I wish that place would vanish.
But also you had the, hey, look, we're a Bond movie, we promise. See, look, we've got this toy from this movie, and 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 this toy from this movie. Oh, and this toy from this movie, just in case you didn't get the hint. Well, on the one hand, it was almost one of the cooler moments of the movie to be reminded of these other movies that were better. It still came off as cheap and desperate almost. It was like, no, seriously, we're a Bond movie. We promise. We promise you we're a Bond movie. Check it out. See the jetpack? Come on. So for me, that was the most ridiculous friendly venue, and it sounds like you concur.
Yeah, it was, because like you said, it's it's just a shameless, and it'd be one thing if it was a shameless set of tributes to the previous films, but instead it's exactly what it encompasses all of my feelings about Die Another Day as a movie, which is it treats the rest of the franchise as a junk store that you can just borrow from secondhand, like the Value Village of James Bond, which that phrase should make you want to vomit. I mean, because you have this jetpack that was freaking cool in Thunderball, and it's just sitting there like a pile of junk. And you have all this other junk sitting there, and it's just... I felt it was, rather than a tribute, I felt it was disrespectful, and it looked like a junkyard. And it really, really, really got me the wrong way. Yuck. Not cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It is the absolute most ridiculous version of Q's Lab we've ever seen, and the most ridiculous friendly venue I think that I can think of by far.
Yeah, so there we have it. We agreed, which doesn't always happen, folks, as you may have realized listening to our episodes of lists thus far. But yeah, ridiculous neutral venue, ridiculous friendly venue. These are things that are really hard to argue with. Now, as far as the neutral and friendly venues on the good end of things, what we decided to do is we decided to combine them into a single list. And we're going with a top 15 list of either neutral or friendly venues. And this was rather tough because when we originally conceived this, we had split these two into two separate top 10 lists.
Yes. And
then at Eric's suggestion, we decided to combine them so we can give a little more love to the villains. And this I'll tell you, for me, this led to some consternation and some real having to think about it a second time. So... this ought to be interesting.
Sorry I made you do that. No, I just found that when we were creating the original lists of 10 each, we did 10 good, 10 neutral, 10 bad, and I found that my bad guys, the villainous lair list, filled up so quickly. Yeah, those guys. Oh, that was just one. That was just Blofeld. But no, my bad guys, lairs, the villainous lairs, that list filled up so quick and so fast, and I was like left with a bunch of leftovers that I was like, I wish I could include this, but I can't kick any of these out. But on the good and neutral side, I found myself struggling to fill the lists. I had, I think, 3 versions of Q's Lab in there. I had like 2 different versions of M's Office in there just to try and fill the list. And I was like, but I really would like to just pick my favorite of those type of venues as opposed to having to pick multiple just to fill a list. So I found it a little bit easier to do the 15. My bad guy list filled out just as quickly, and my good/neutral list was able to be filled out without too much duplication. So.
All right. So how did you start off your combined neutral and friendly venue list now that we've revamped them?
All right. To begin with, my number 15 neutral/friendly venue is a neutral venue. It is the Shanghai skyscraper from Skyfall, the beautiful glass skyscraper in which Bond fights the hitman there, and just the way Patrice. I always forget that name every damn time. When Bond and Patrice are fighting up there, it's just a fantastically shot scene. It's absolutely beautiful with the ads going on the other side of the building, making the different colored lights come through, and just the way everything about that building was gorgeous. And it's actually based off of a much shorter building actually in the United Kingdom. It does not exist actually in Shanghai, that particular building, unfortunately. So it's not a place that you could actually visit. You can visit the building that they used the design of, but it won't be nearly as fun because it's not 100 and something stories tall. So.
Oops.
But I really did enjoy that skyscraper. I really did enjoy it. I mean, all of the locations in Skyfall were fantastic. In fact, just kind of taking a quick glance through my list, I'm seeing that I have quite a few locations from Skyfall falling on this list. So they did a damn good job with that one when it came to locations. And the Shanghai skyscraper was one of my favorites, and got in there at number 15 on my good/neutral list.
All right. I don't have it on my list, but I can't fault you for putting it there. It is a gorgeous location, whether arrived at by an elevator from the ground level of Shanghai or through camera trickery through location switching. It's all of the Shanghai stuff was just so phenomenally shot. I mean, that's just a masterwork of cinematography, both for the exterior establishing shots and the indoor shots of that fight inside the building and the jellyfish shown on the wall and just the lighting, just everything about that was gorgeous. So I can completely understand. It's not on my list, but I can completely understand.
So what did make your list at number 15 of the new revamped list?
At number 15, this is part of a box set. And it's not very remarkable, but that's exactly why it's on the list. And so at number 15, I have Felix Leiter's house from License to Kill. And the reason that I have it is because you've seen this dude, Felix Leiter, all the time throughout the entire series. I mean, yeah, he took a break for most of the Roger Moore era after Live and Let Die. In fact, all of it after Live and Let Die. But it's someone you've always known, and you've always wondered, what's this guy's life got to be like? Now you get to find out. And he's a regular guy. I mean, he is basically a typical middle-class American. He does not live in a gated community, which is exactly what I would have expected out of a top CIA turned DEA operative. I would have expected that after a career like his, where he'd been able to, reach a level of seniority where he could gain something better than the average civil servant does. But no, he lives in a regular Florida community with a grill in the back, a messy-ass office, papers strewn everywhere, even before it's ransacked. But it also speaks to his own personality. That's his memorabilia on the wall. That's a picture of his wife on the desk. Those are his papers. That's his dot matrix printer there. You can tell he's got to be doing his own housekeeping, his own dishes. I mean, so it shows that you want to know what Felix Leiter is like, the CIA equivalent of James Bond? He's a normal dude. And finding that personality out in just the few moments you get to go through his house, that says a lot to me. And I thought that was very interesting. And that's why that's number 15 on my combined venues list.
Yeah, that is a good one, because that is, you really get a chance to see how much thought they put into this sort of thing. Because, many people might not even think about that. They might not even think, what does this guy's house represent? They just, it's just a house, just make it. But like you said, it really represents who that character would be. So that means somebody had to put quite a bit of thought into it. That didn't happen by accident. They didn't just accidentally make it perfect like that. Somebody put a lot of thought into it. And it really speaks to why we love this franchise so much, is because they do put so much thought into things like this. Into just the little, almost, I wouldn't call it throwaway scenes, but, almost scenes that don't really mean a whole lot to the actual film itself, but when looking at the characters really can mean a lot. So, good call.
And that actually dovetails very nicely in with my number 14 pick. And I'm going to cheat a little bit, because the way that we had designed this list is you had to pick, okay, if you're going to pick a venue, you have to note exactly which version of the venue it is. Because, of course, if one of us decides to say Q's Lab, well, which one? Because there's all sorts of them.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to cheat. Why? Because I'm the host and I can.
You've gone power hungry.
I have. But no, I'm going to pick James Bond's flat, either from Dr. No or Live and Let Die. And the thing is, the reason I can say that is it doesn't frickin' matter, because his flat is the polar opposite of Felix Leiter's house. I mean, the only difference between the two is that a generic interior decorator from the early 1960s did the Dr. No version, and a generic interior decorator from the early 1970s did the Live and Let Die version. Beyond that, there is zero personality to either one of these places. It's something where he could have moved in with just the pre-existing furniture. He has no personal memorabilia at all. There are no photos. The prints are of English royalty, which are just generic. It's generic furniture, generic TV set. I thought the placement of the TV set compared to the chair was really weird in Dr. No, by the way, but that may have been moved while she was playing mini golf. But there's just no personality to it. It's the polar opposite of Felix, because if you walk into Felix's place, you can have a look and say, okay, I know this is Felix's house, if you know who Felix is at all. Just like if you walk into my own place. If you know me at all, yes, I live here. There's no question that I live here. And in James Bond's case, no, this could be anybody. This is almost a hotel room. And it's a cheaper hotel room than he would exist in out in the field. And I think that's the most important aspect, because I think this speaks to the fact that James Bond's idea of life is transient, and home has nothing to do with his mailing address. Home is his work, and he doesn't expect to be in his flat most of the time. He expects to be working.
Yes.
Where then he has the luxurious hotels that he insists on. Like, for example, in Quantum of Solace, I would rather stay in a morgue than stay in this cheap hotel. So then he goes to someplace really nice and says he won the lottery. But the thing is, if you look at his flat is barely better than that cheap hotel. A little bit, but not by much. And I think that speaks very much to who he is as a person. So just as Felix's place says who Felix is, Bond's place, in either movie we see it in, speaks to who he is. And that also includes the girl in the closet.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's completely opposite. You can really tell that Bond's house is the house of a guy who doesn't necessarily expect to get home to it, whether it be because he's killed in the field or whether it be because he's just still out working a case or a job or whatever he does. But he doesn't expect to get home to it, and he doesn't expect to stay there long when he does either. So it's not a home. It's just a house. Whereas with Felix, he's more of the family man. He's more of the guy he's expecting to go home at the end of the night. You know, that's who he is as a person. And I think those two locations are perfect representations of those two characters. I didn't put them on my lists this time, but I do completely understand.
So what did you put in for your number 14 of our combined venues list?
My number 14 is another neutral venue. I guess you could call it a neutral venue. Technically, I guess it could also be a good guys venue that was attempted to be taken over by the bad guys, if you think about it that way. But I would consider it a neutral ground because it's not really controlled by Bond. And that would be Fort Knox. The entirety of Fort Knox in Goldfinger. Just an absolutely iconic American building, and obviously a target in almost any movie it's depicted in. It's a target. And
I can't imagine why.
Yeah, something about they keep something in there. I don't know. It's weird. I think there's something shiny inside. I don't know. But I just love their use of Fort Knox in this movie. And even though the villain's goal was utterly ridiculous, it still fit. It fit that character, and
it makes more sense than trying to steal the gold out of it. Actually,
true. Yeah, but yeah. So I had to include Fort Knox on my list just as a general cool location, and like I said, you could look at it as neutral because Bond didn't control it, and the bad guys only tried to take it over, or you could look at it as a good venue because, technically speaking, it was in the control of the U.S. military before the attempted takeover. So. However you want to look at it, it belongs on this list, and it is my number 14.
I like how they point out, oh, and in case you thought you were going there, let's not forget the tank division that's based there. Kind of a deterrent, that. But no, I can't fault you for putting it on the list, and we'll discuss that in a bit. But what about for your number 13, sir?
My lucky number 13 couldn't be anything other than a casino. And in this case, it's the Golden Dragon Casino from Skyfall. I thought this casino was just beautifully designed. Just everything about this casino was gorgeous. And unfortunately, it doesn't actually exist. You can't actually go gamble at the Golden Dragon. Hopefully somebody, maybe one of these Vegas guys will build a replica casino someday, and we can all go and watch giant Gila monsters battle it out as we walk across to the gaming center. But
I just thought of something.
What's that?
Now, of course, because this is airing in public, we're going to ruin our chances at fame and fortune at this point. But hey, if anyone from Eon is listening, I expect royalties from this. You want to know how you can make a ton of money so you can stop all this? Well, we're almost out of money bullshit every time you want to make a movie. Build a James Bond-themed casino in Vegas and have all of the iconic James Bond casino venues in this casino, including the Golden Dragon.
Yes. Let's get a couple of $1 billion together and make this happen.
Dude, I bet we could get the money. I mean, come on. Barbara Broccoli, I know you're listening, or at least one of your staff is. Yeah. Give us a call.
Let me
we've got plenty of ways to contact us. You can email me at Ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. You can find me on Twitter at CinemaOTR.
You can find me on Twitter at Eric J. Dewey or by email at eric@hermajestiespod.com. And while you're out there on the Twitters, why not follow the show? We're on Twitter at hermajestiespod. Also, give us a like over on our Facebook page, facebook.com/hermajestiespod. And of course, you can always comment directly on these episodes on our website, hermajestiespod.com. We are accessible. Our contact information is out there. So, Mr. Wynn, if you're listening, you wanted that idea for the next big casino, we've got it for you.
Ms. Broccoli, our lines are open. Love your work, by the way. But you were talking about the Golden Dragon, Mr. Dewey.
Yes, I was. I love this casino. I thought it was gorgeous the way it was laid out. Everything about this was just really, really cool. It's the kind of casino I would love to go play a game in. I probably couldn't afford to because I'm sure they don't have $3 poker or $5 blackjack at this type of casino. But I would still love to go and enjoy it. I love casinos, and this one is just fantastic in its design. It's just beautiful, and so that's why I made my list.
It really, really is, and it broke my heart not to have this on the list because I love this location. And a lot of that is the design. Part of it is the cinematography. I mean, folks, let's just think about this. When you have cinematography, everyone thinks, oh, it's just a matter of pointing and shooting a camera. Have you ever tried to take a picture? It's about like that. It's harder than it looks. And when you're doing it outside, I'm not saying this is easy. If it were easy, then Ansel Adams would be a dime a dozen, and of course he's not. But when you do something outside, the vista is your friend. The vista is going to help you out a lot. When you're doing something inside, you have the confines of walls and floors and ceilings that by necessity cramp the style of what you're looking at, and that's a lot harder. So to make some place that's as crowded as the Golden Dragon looks so amazing is just a fantastic piece of cinematography. And so you have the design, you have the way that it looks on camera, and hey, having Bernice Marlowe step down the stairs and sit at the bar there is not going to hurt matters. And hey, Komodo Dragon, come on, dude. But gorgeous place, and it breaks my heart not to have it on my list.
It really is a cool location, and that's why I had to include it. So how about you? What did make your list at lucky number 13?
At lucky number 13, a venue that was not so lucky because it partially sank under mysterious circumstances, that would be the Queen Elizabeth, the wreck of which is used as the secret base of British intelligence in The Man with the Golden Gun. I love how they did this. I mean, you kind of figure something's got to be up with it when they make such a point to make sure that somebody points it out when there's a tour boat going by it earlier on in the movie. But it's still just awesome when you see it revealed. I mean, the thing is tilted, it's listing, it's wrecked. So they build floors at 45, 30, whatever degree angles there are to refit the place so that it can be used as a functioning office. And I love how they say, well, with real estate prices in Hong Kong, it's actually a really good deal. It's just a wonderful use of a great location and really on the ball with the writers of picking it up just a few years after the wreck happened. So I love the use of it. And you go back to it a few times during the film, which I thought was really cool. So it's not just a one and done. It's not a throwaway. So if you're going to put M somewhere in Hong Kong that isn't one of the biggest office buildings or hotels in the place, yeah, the wreck of the Queen Elizabeth will do very nicely. So the wreck of the QE from The Man with the Golden Gun.
I really like that location as well, and unfortunately it didn't quite make the cut for this particular list, but it was definitely under consideration because, again, as you said, it's just a fantastic use of an actual real-life location, which I absolutely love, and it makes sense. I mean, they make it make sense in the film, and that's always a plus too. So I agree with your choice. It didn't quite make my revised list, but good call.
Yeah.
I'm glad I made your list.
For
so
number 12, what I have is yet another iconic real-world location that I'm surprised wasn't used earlier in the James Bond series, and that is the Eiffel Tower, used to great effect toward the beginning of A View to a Kill.
Yes, absolutely. That was definitely a great location. That was a great use of the location as well. And again, another real-world location put to real good use in the movie. So
It's iconic. And that's, I think, one of the major things when you're going to use a real-life location in a James Bond movie. It has to be something, to me, that has a presence outside of the country in which it's located that speaks to the whole world, because I think that's the point of James Bond, is that even though he's British, he speaks to the whole world. His world is exotic to the entire world. So, like, when you see something in a James Bond movie, you don't expect it to be, okay, if I live in Prague, I get what that means, but if I'm outside of Prague, it means nothing to me. Whereas the Eiffel Tower, this isn't just a landmark for France. This is a landmark for the world. And you don't just have him standing in front of it or running past it. No, he has dinner there. And then there's an assassination that occurs in the restaurant. And he has a great chase scene up the scaffold to the top of it. And then we have an insane parachute stunt off the top of it, which somebody got fired for, by the way, because they decided to do it recreationally. But it's just such a wonderful use of one of the great locations on the planet Earth in a James Bond movie. So that's why I had to include La Tour Eiffel from A View to a Kill at my number 12 spot.
All right. In my number 12 spot, I put, this was one of the ones I had to pare down originally, but I went with just one of them. This is M's office. I went specifically with the version shown in GoldenEye. And I really had a tough time. It was a real coin flip for me deciding between the GoldenEye version and the Dr. No version. Because on the one hand, Dr. No, that's the first time we see it. That's the first time we are experiencing Bond's boss and his office and his location. But in GoldenEye, you're seeing M as Judi Dench, or Judi Dench as M, however you want to put it. We're experiencing her office for the first time, and the change is fairly dramatic, and it really speaks to her character.
For one thing, there's bourbon in it.
Yep.
I honestly can say I was shocked to find American whiskey in her office. I mean, I can't say I fault her for it. I just hope she picked good bourbon. I'd assume she did, but it surprised me to have American whiskey in her office.
It seemed to speak to me to mean that she does like the best of, she understands that it's not as, it kind of spoke to me in the same respect as her speech. She said that you're a relic of the Cold War. It's more of a global world now. It used to be just everybody for themselves, and now, there's very clearly defined, groups that are good and bad, but there's also a lot of people who are just kind of on the fringe. But it seems to me that she has embraced the alliedness of it a little bit more than maybe the predecessors had. And that's kind of what I took from that. It may have been just a throwaway line that somebody threw in there. Maybe Judi Dench just liked bourbon, and she said, I'd rather have bourbon. And they said, all right, whatever. Maybe I'm reading more into it than there actually was, but I'd like to think it's because she embraces the best of all possible worlds instead of just sticking to, I can only do what's British.
Yeah, and I can't fault your choice. It's not on my list, but I can't fault your choice.
What do you have in your list then next?
Well, moving up to the number 11 spot, I have probably the single most iconic location on the planet ever built by humankind. And that would be the Pyramids of Giza from The Spy Who Loved Me.
You mean allegedly built by humans? Haven't you been watching the History Channel? Aliens. I'm kidding.
Giorgio is a scream. I have to say, Giorgio is a scream. I would actually laugh my ass off if he made a cameo in a Bond movie. I really would. But why did I pick these? As the late, great George Carlin described them, because they're the fucking pyramids, man. I mean, just how much greater of a historic location can you get? And once again, just like with the Eiffel Tower, it's not a throwaway. They make really good use of it. There's a good reason why Bond and Agent Triple X are there. I also really like that they included the presentation that was done in the late 1970s in front of the pyramids. That's a real show, ladies and gentlemen. So if you happen to be around in 76, 77, and we're in Egypt, you could actually go see that presentation. And the producers saw that and thought, hey, that's kind of cool. We're going to work it in. And so I like that they did that. And I like that more happens there than they just walk by, sit in the audience, and go meet somebody. No, somebody gets killed at the pyramids by Jaws.
Murder makes everything better.
How freaking cool is this? So it's just a really well done use of one of the greatest locations on the planet Earth. How could I not include the Pyramids of Giza from The Spy Who Loved Me at number 11?
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. I especially like the fact that not only did they use the real show that exists there, but they didn't put it solely as background. A lot of times you'll see movies where they have, a real, some type of presentation or something like that, or a show or an opera or a movie, anything like that going on in the background. And it's completely overshadowed by the action that's going on, and you don't even know what's going on and, whatever. But in this movie, they actually did use the presentation in its fullness. Basically, it was kind of even footing with the action that was going on, and I thought that made the drama of the action even more intense.
Yeah, the cues from the presentation marked the cues of the action. Like when they had the heavy synthesizer notes when something really important was said in the presentation and the light show changed, that was a signal for something different to occur in the Bond movie action. And that was just awesome. That was just a brilliant piece of editing as far as I was concerned.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I thought it was a fantastic location, and we might touch on it again in a little bit. Who knows?
Fair enough. So what do you have at number 11, sir?
Number 11 for me, this is a location that I had to include it. It almost got bumped when I changed my list, but I had to include it. And that would be Octopussy's Island Paradise. Her floating palace filled with beautiful young women all ready to service a secret double O agent. This is just a fantastic location. And like you said, it's like Bond's dream retirement village. Like, it's perfect. It's someplace that you could see Bond going at the end of his life to hang out. And it's just so darn cool. I mean, floating palace. Come on now. Well,
I understand what you're saying. Having it at your number 11 position, I'm just going to say I question your judgment, sir.
Uh-oh. I'm in trouble again. Well then, does that bring us into our top 10?
It does. So what do you have at number 10?
Number 10 for me is the Eiffel Tower. Like you said, this is a brilliant use of a real-world location, and it was put to such great effect. And like I said, not just a throwaway, not just a, hey, we're here, so we're shooting, the movie's supposedly taking place in Paris, so I guess we better have a shot of the Eiffel Tower in here. No, they actually said, okay, we're going to have a scene in the Eiffel Tower, on the Eiffel Tower, around and inside and all around. So it's a fantastic use of the venue, and really one of the better moments of that movie. So I had to put the Eiffel Tower in there, and it cracked my top 10.
Outstanding choice. Can't fault you for it. And only a couple places off of mine, so understand. As for my number 10, it's also an extremely iconic real-world location. That said, it's a location that moves around a lot. It just happens to be so big that we couldn't count it as a vehicle on our vehicles list. And that is the Orient Express from Russia with Love, the single most famous train on the face of the earth. And just an outstanding cinema set piece, from noir to adventure to mystery. It's like you haven't really made it as a genre until you can somehow be set on the Orient Express. And it's interesting, too. You have Sean Connery killing people on the Orient Express, and then about 11 years later, he would also be starring in Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express, just post-Bond. Just a little bit of trivia for you. But no, it's just one of the single great set pieces in all of cinema. And I think that using it helped the series, because this was only the second movie in the series, helped the series put the world on notice that we're not just going to be rock'em sock'em action. We're serious, and we're going to be here a while. And just very, very good use of it as well. And I think it borrows a lot from an earlier film by Alfred Hitchcock, who was actually at one time considered to direct. He didn't actually do it, but he was considered to direct. But if you look at North by Northwest from Alfred Hitchcock, of course, that train is not the Orient Express. It's just an Amtrak from New York to Chicago. But just the way he uses the train, it goes across similarly. And then there's another scene later on in From Russia with Love, going a little off topic, that also has roots in North by Northwest, the helicopter chase as opposed to the crop duster chase. But just the similarities there, it's just a beautiful use of location. So I couldn't, in good conscience, not put the Orient Express in my top 10.
Very fair, very fair. So what about moving up to your number 9 spot? What did you have there?
My number 9 spot is something that you already mentioned, and I admit the first time that I thought of this list, it somehow slipped, but when we redid it, it was like, duh, how could I not put that there? And so I went with Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is a half of a real location anyway, because, of course, the exterior looks like Fort Knox. The interior,
who knows? Probably
doesn't, because logistically, it would actually be impossible to stack gold that way. The floors wouldn't handle the weight. With that said, the actual commander of the Fort Knox base at the time that the movie was released was kind enough to say he was surprised at how accurate they were with some things. He wouldn't say what they were. But yeah, just great use of a real-world locale. Completely ridiculous the way that they used it, but we don't care. It's still... It's the pinnacle of what people would come to expect from over-the-top James Bond, because this is the first time that we went extremely over-the-top. I mean, because let's face it, knocking out everybody around Fort Knox and then going to nuke the gold, I mean, that's really over-the-top. And so this is the template for over-the-top Bond as we would see him for the rest of the series. And it's a very good use of location. So I had to include Fort Knox at my number 9. What about you, sir?
Number 9 for me, I had to pick a Q's laboratory. There had to be at least one in here. And so many of them were so great, it was very tough to pick just the one. But I decided to go with the Q's lab, in which we say goodbye to Desmond Llewellyn. And so my pick for number 9 is Q's laboratory from The World Is Not Enough. It's one of those moments that... it's sad, but at the same time, they really gave him a great send-off. They really did, and it was so beautiful what they were able to do. So,
and the irony of it was that even though now we look at it as Desmond Llewellyn's retirement scene, because he unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, passed away after The World Is Not Enough was made, he had actually expected to be in the next movie. He wasn't quite done yet, but the fact that something was able to be done that gave him something that approximated a send-off was just beautiful. So I can't fault you for this one at all.
Well, thank you, sir. Yeah, it was... Q's Lab's always a fun location. Every time it shows up, it's a fun location. You get to see all sorts of gadgets that don't end up actually being used in the film. You get to see the explanation of some gadgets that do end up being made into the film. But for me, that one, just the emotional aspect of it kind of trumps the others and gets it onto the list.
Now, I'm gonna kind of break up the snaking that we usually do here to give my number 8, just because it happens to be all of modern MI6 from The World Is Not Enough, including Q's Lab. Because I looked at it, because that was the one movie where you got to see everything. You got to see M's office, you got to see Q's Lab, you got to see Situation Room, and you got to see the dock of Q's fishing boat, which is several stories up, but happens to have an exit onto the Thames anyway. You got to see basically the largest slice of MI6 operations that you're ever going to see in a film. And so I took the opportunity to pick that specifically. And hey, you also got to see a medical exam room headed by Dr. Molly Wormflash.
That name sounds so menopausal, doesn't it?
No, not at all. Hey, did you see Serena Scott Thomas without the body double there? I mean, on the perv side, maybe not enough of her, but enough. But no, The World Is Not Enough. No, I wanted to include MI6, and especially it's really nice to have seen the exterior and, of course, the fictionalized idea of the interior together. I find it really kind of cool, too, the story behind when they first were going to use MI6 as an exterior location for a Bond movie. The British government had considered not allowing it for quote-unquote security reasons. And a member of parliament stood up and said, for all that James Bond has done for us, this is the least we can do for James Bond. And so when you see an exterior shot of MI6, that's an exterior shot of MI6. And architecturally, it's a much better building than the CIA at Langley. I can say this from experience, not from the MI6 part, but I've been to Langley, and it's a boring-ass building. So I had to include modern MI6, including, as you said, Q's lab and his fishing boat launch from The World Is Not Enough at my number 8.
All right. For me, number 8 came in at, or for me, the Orient Express came in at number 8. Only a couple of spots off from you, but I agree with everything you said about it. It's an iconic, it's a conveyance, but it's too big to be just considered a vehicle. It really is a locale. And that's why we didn't include it in the vehicles episode that we did, but we do include it in our locations episode. And it is a fantastic location, and it was used so beautifully in From Russia with Love. It was not a throwaway. Again, it was not just let's make sure the Orient Express goes through this shot, or we'll say that he rode on the Orient Express, and we won't show it. We'll just say that it happened, and then we'll say, hey, Bond was on the Orient Express. No, they actually set a good scene in there, so that's why I made it to my list at number 8, the Orient Express.
As for all those reasons and all the ones I mentioned before, can't fault you for it. Placement's close. No qualms on my part. And that brings us to the top 007 combined venues of neutral and friendly. So what do you have at the honored spot of 7?
At number 007 on my list is the quote-unquote new MI6, the underground bunker version of MI6 that we saw in Skyfall. I thought this was just very, very interesting. Again, using somewhat real-world locations. I mean, there are a lot of abandoned underground tunnels in the London area, so to think that some of them may be used in this way is not unheard of. And in fact, they said that part of it was Churchill's bunker, which is also accurate. So there is a lot of possible truth to it, and that's always makes for a fun location. And I love the way they blended the new world technologies and the old architecture and such, and it just came off looking really cool and classy instead of it could have easily been cheap and cheesy, and I don't think they went that way at all. I thought it was very well done.
Well, I can't say I disagree with you, because my number 007 is Bunker MI6 from Skyfall.
Nice.
So I completely agree with you.
Great minds think alike, I tell you what.
Indeed. And for all the reasons you said, it's just really interesting. It makes sense that, okay, after somebody decided to blow up M's office in the real MI6, that MI6 genuine operations will go underground for a while during the time of crisis. And this is not something that's foreign to Britain. This is where a lot of the British government happened during the Blitz. Churchill ran World War II from these tunnels. It's just, and I think it's a really great modern update of that bunker mentality. And I like how, like you said, they put the modern technology into there. I don't necessarily like how they had their maximum security cell over a frickin' sewer grate, but we're going to let that part go. Because overall, it was just too cool to see the old World War II and earlier tunnels used for Bunker MI6. And that's why, as with you, my number 007 is Bunker MI6 from Skyfall.
Awesome. How about coming in at number 6? What do you have there?
At number 6, I have what I consider the father of these really cool MI6 locations, because really early on, we got to see M's office, Moneypenny's little anteroom, and that's about it. I mean, but then came You Only Live Twice, at which point we got to see Tanaka's Japanese Secret Service headquarters, which is just awesome. And how do you get into it? You slide. And it's got a private train. And it's a combination of 50s, 60s science fiction moved into adventure that is completely plausible. And considering how real estate in Tokyo looks, I mean, even in the 60s, once we'd had the post-World War II construction boom, because, of course, a lot of the city was set on fire, real estate's at a premium. You want to keep things secret, so it makes sense. And it was just really cool. It's like a location and a gadget combined in one. And so I had to put Tanaka's Japanese Secret Service HQ from You Only Live Twice at my number 6.
That makes perfect sense to me. I didn't even think of that one. Even after going through and redoing the list, it didn't really pop up in my mind. But now that you're talking about it, it does definitely. It probably should have made my list, come to think of it. But it was a fun location and definitely realistic enough to get by while still being out there enough to be cool. So I get it. That is not what my number 6 is, though. My number 6 is the poker room, specifically from Casino Royale. The rest of the casino, I did like it. It wasn't bad. I just felt it was, generic casino-y. It didn't really stand out, good or bad, for me. But I loved the way that poker tournament room was set up. I thought that was absolutely gorgeous, and it was done just right for the movie. The way they had the table set up just a little bit, not enough to be like a huge towering platform over everybody else, but enough that you knew this is where the action is going on. This is where you're supposed to be watching, kind of setting it like a stage almost. And I just really thought it was put to really great effect in that film. And so that is why my number 6 pick is the poker room, the poker tournament room, I should say, from Casino Royale. All
right. I can understand your choice. It's high enough that I'm not going to quite question your judgment, but I'm going to wonder about it. So what do you have at number 5, sir, cracking the top 5 spots?
Coming into number 5 is one that I thought I might end up leaving off the list because I chose a different one, but I just ended up not being able to do it. This one had to be on the list, and it had to be high. In my top 5, at number 5, is M's office from Dr. No. Again, this was the first time we saw M's office, and it was one of the best Bond-M interactions, I think, until we get to GoldenEye. Because I thought the interactions between M and Bond really kind of went downhill after Dr. No. They didn't go, drop precipitously, but they did start sliding, and it got to a point where Bond just didn't listen to a thing M said at all, and it was like, that's not the relationship they're supposed to have, and I hate this. And then they got it back a little bit with GoldenEye, I thought. And definitely with Casino Royale and the 2 newest ones, definitely it's back. But I think that that interaction between M and Bond in Dr. No in his office was fantastic and really set the scene for what Bond and M's relationship should be like. And, again, it was the first time we saw it, and I think it's the best. So that's why number 5 is M's office from Dr. No.
I can say I didn't include that. I thought of M's office in terms of because of the brevity of these lists, I thought of it in terms of all of MI6, and after we revised the list, I even included Q's Labs that way, which was really, really hard for me to do. That said, for me, when I think of the pre-Judi Dench things that occur in M's office, the scene that really stands out for me is From Russia with Love, when he's listening to the tape of Bond talking to Tatiana, and she's asking him questions, and he says, well, there was this one time with M in Tokyo, and M shuts it off right there and says, okay, that's all, gentlemen. We're done. That's the standout old school M's office moment for me. I don't have it on my list, but I understand why it's on yours.
That works. And so what did you have cracking your top 5 list?
For number 5, I have Wei Lin's Hideout from Tomorrow Never Dies. It's a little combination of the Chinese version of MI6 and Q's Lab, all in one little compact package disguised as a Vietnamese bicycle shop. I mean, it was just so cool. It was one of the most brilliant parts of this entire movie, because she presses a couple little buttons and suddenly things slide back and you have these computer terminals and you have an armory, you have a dragon that spits fire, you have stuff that shoots arrows, you have just all kinds of really cool stuff all into one place. You have a keyboard James Bond can't read, so he can be insulted, which is kind of funny. And it was just so amusing. I smile and outwardly laugh every time I watch that scene. It's just so well done. And it's nice to see the idea of Q's lab turned on its ear and given a red Chinese paint job. And so I had to include Wei Lin's hideout from Tomorrow Never Dies.
All right. That was definitely a cool scene. It didn't crack my list, but it definitely was a fun scene. I don't disagree with you on anything you said. It was really cool to see, like, oh, look, these guys have their own version too. They've got their own little hideout with all the goodies and all the toys and all the trinkets and such. It's always fun to see that sort of thing.
So now for my number 4, this is one where I called a little bit of a mulligan after we had decided to combine our original top 10 lists for neutral and friendly venues. I thought this one over. Originally, this was much lower on my neutral list, but having thought about it, I know that I put it lower at that time because I was overcompensating for what might be nepotism. And then I thought about it and like, no, it's got to go where I really want it to go. So we have the one real world location in the James Bond series where I have actually been, and it is in fact one of my favorite places on the face of the planet. I love this place. I go here as often as I can. I don't care if it costs me $6 a turn to go across it. It is the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California, from A View to a Kill, which was, as with all of the real-world locations we've discussed, put to brilliant use for the climactic scene of that movie. Because whatever you thought of the movie up to that point, when you have Zoran's blimp getting stuck at the top of the tower of the Golden Gate Bridge and Max Zorin coming out to have a duel with James Bond on the tower, oh, it's going on. I mean, this is just cool. There's a reason why they feature the bridge on all of the best posters for A View to a Kill. It's because it's that important to the movie. It's what sells the movie. And just such a great, again, internationally iconic landmark. It's not something that's unique to America. Everybody knows what this is, no matter what country you're from. And it just puts it to such brilliant use.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. I'm glad that you moved it up on your list because I remember when we were discussing this before and going over some of our topics. For those who may have noticed, we originally were going to put this episode out about a month ago, and due to some technical difficulties, the episode was lost. So
this is the only episode where Eric and I have had any idea what each other's lists might look like. And because we did some revisions, we still don't entirely, as you've noticed.
Yeah, there's only a few things that stayed the same when we had to redo things. But I do remember that I was a little shocked at how low the Golden Gate Bridge was on your list. And so I'm glad to see that it made a rise in stature.
Yeah, it definitely deserved it. It had to. Once I decided, no, I'm not overcompensating for the fact that I am completely in love with this location in real life. It had to, because it's just such an awesome place and just well used in the film. So the Golden Gate Bridge from A View to a Kill is my number 4.
Absolutely. No, I definitely don't fault you for that at all. We might talk about that again in a few moments. In the meantime, I'll just bring up my number 4, which is the freaking pyramids in The Spy Who Loved Me. I thought this was one of the most brilliant uses of real-world locations that they've ever done. And it's such a phenomenal real-world location to begin with. Like you said, it's just amazing testament to engineering skill of those long past. And
or of the aliens.
Yeah, of course. Aliens did it, I'm sure. But anyway, I love the pyramids, and more so than even just the pyramids themselves, I love the way they use that presentation. As I said, I love the way they used it almost in the foreground instead of just relegating it to the background. It really, for me, it was perfect. So that's why it came in at number 4 for me. It's the Pyramids of Giza.
All right. And what about as we crack our top 3 combined neutral and friendly venues? What do you have for there?
Going into the top 3, now we're really getting into the best of the best. And for me, the number 3 on this list is MI6 in its entirety, or modern MI6 as you put it, which has been featured in various movies, but we really got to see the most in The World Is Not Enough. We got to see a bit more of the inside than we've ever gotten to see. Now, whether or not it was any sort of accurate is probably up for debate, but it
probably does not include Dr. Molly Wormflash.
Oh, dang it. Well, there goes my trip. I'm not visiting anymore. I love the fact that it is used, that it is the real building, and that we got to see some of the inside. Whether, obviously I'm sure the inside was created for the movie, and it's probably not the actual inside. The actual inside's probably pretty boring. It's probably mostly offices and such. I would imagine that the good stuff is kept far away from anybody's eyes. But it was very well used in that movie, and I definitely think that it deserves a spot this high on the list. So MI6 in its entirety, if I had to pick the movie that most defines it, I would say The World Is Not Enough.
All right. Now, my top 3 is a box set, and it is a triple play that I think defines 007, at least as far as above and beyond what we already discussed when I put his flat at number 14. So starting at number 3 for me, and I know that this may cause a little bit of consternation for you that I have it this low, and that is Skyfall from Skyfall. Go figure.
Wow. I'm shocked and appalled. But go ahead and justify yourself, sir.
The reason I have it at number 3, this is James Bond's past. This is where he came from. And one of the most important reasons I have it at number 3, he hates it. He says he hates it. Now, I'm sure that there's that little twinge of hate there where he's sentimental, but he hates it anyway. I can completely understand this. I don't necessarily like the city where I was born in either. And granted, Skyfall's not a city. It's an estate, but that counts. And I think it plays a little with canon, but I'm okay with that. Because the way that I originally read the Ian-Fleming based canon was that while James Bond's family wasn't destitute, they weren't really wealthy enough to have owned an estate large enough to have a gamekeeper, and that any wealth they had was due to an aunt who he came to live with after his parents had died. Whereas here, his parents were well off enough to have had an estate. So, but I'm okay with that. That's fine, because it's never really been established in the movies. But I do like this glimpse into his past. You can see the forge in which Bond was created, the little crucible he had to go through inside that tunnel. And you can see the graves of his parents. You can see the empty moors, which are kind of like his empty soul, if you want to get poetic about it. And you can see how he's perfectly okay with it when the place blows up, partially due to his own sabotage. So as far as the defining piece of James Bond's past, that's why I have Skyfall at number 3.
All right. I am a little surprised that it's that low, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. So how about number 2?
Number 2 for me describes what I felt in the classic James Bond series was his ideal future. This is what I affectionately referred to as the James Bond retirement community, and that would be Octopussy's Island, the floating palace in Octopussy. Because if we had really, really thought about it, and we have 20/20 hindsight now, Roger Moore should have quit after Octopussy instead of A View to a Kill. As much as I really like A View to a Kill, even though I know it's not a good movie, I like it anyway. But ideally, for the sake of James Bond, the end of Octopussy was a great time for him to retire. And Octopussy herself was a great person to retire with, as a business partner, as a romantic partner, and maybe a little bit as more, too. And, hey, where else does James Bond want to hang up his boots, or at least trade them for smuggler's boots, than an island full of gorgeous women who are very athletic? So as the ideal James Bond retirement community, an island full of women, we won't see 007 till dawn. I choose Octopussy's Island, the floating palace from Octopussy.
All right. I can't fault you for putting it on your list. Like I said, I had it at number 11, so I definitely think it deserves to be here. I am shocked and appalled that it fell in above Skyfall, but whatever. It's your list. You can do what you want.
Well, my reasoning, again, is James Bond hated Skyfall, whereas Octopussy's Island is his idea of heaven. So I'm putting it that way.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. For my number 2, I went with the location that you moved further up on your list, and I'm happy about it because I have it all the way up to number 2, and that is the Golden Gate Bridge from A View to a Kill. I thought this was the most fantastic use of a real-world location that they've ever done in a Bond film to date. Just the way that not only is it there, and again, they don't just use it as a background shot. Oh, he's in San Francisco, so I guess we're going to have to show the bridge. No, they have a battle on the bridge. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic, and it really is the best bit of that movie, which I agree with you. It's not a great movie, but it is a fun movie. I still like it, even though it's not that great. It's just one of those movies that you know it's bad. You know there's problems with it, but you're okay with it. You're okay with it. You move past it. So
and
that's my number 2.
Interesting story behind that. The ability to use not just the Golden Gate Bridge, but the San Francisco Civic Center, which everyone else would call City Hall, which is also the old UN building, and the streets of San Francisco. The reason that Eon Productions got to use so much of the city at will was because the then mayor, Dianne Feinstein, now serving the United States Congress, was a fan of Roger Moore. And so when she heard that there's a Roger Moore James Bond movie that wants to film in San Francisco, she said they can do what they want. I just thought that was awesome.
So what is your number 1 pick for a friendly and or neutral venue?
My number 1 pick for a friendly and or neutral venue is, as I mentioned, Skyfall defines Bond's past. And the floating palace of Octopussy's Island defines Bond's idealized future, assuming he lives to get to one. Which is why, to define everything that is the present of James Bond 007, the entirety of the Casino Royale from Casino Royale, not just the poker room and the entire gambling hall, which are very much 007. Because, of course, 007 has to have a Baccarat table. 007 has to have, as we move on into the modern age, the poker table. He has to have some place where he can put down money, get chips, and win, and meet beautiful women, and so on and so forth. But along with that, he also has to have the high luxury hotel that is also part and parcel to the casino in this movie. Because that is where he lives day to day. That is the opposite of his flat, that is his mailing address. And it's the hotels that define who he is. The absolute luxury of them. The forget 4 stars, I'm staying in 5 stars or nothing. And then the fine restaurant that's attached to it. And the bar that serves custom-made to order liquor drinks, as opposed to custom-made to order soft drinks, which I'm sure they would do too if he asked. But just all of it together defines the lifestyle of 007. And that's why I had to pick as my number 1 Casino Royale from Casino Royale.
All right. I understand your reasoning. Again, I thought that the casino itself was a little too generic for my taste, but not in a bad way, necessarily. I mean, like I said, it wasn't like it didn't take me out of the moment. It didn't make me think, this hotel sucks, I would hate to be here. No, it was a nice hotel and a nice gambling hall, but it didn't jump out at me anything except for that poker room specifically. But I can't fault your reasoning, and I do appreciate the thought process there. So I won't disagree with you too much. But I will tell you that my number 1 has been since pretty much I saw this movie for the first time, the Skyfall estate from Skyfall. I love this. Everything about this is perfect, including the fact that he hates it, which obviously he couldn't have hated it that much because he kept it for so long. Obviously, he had to have been paying to keep this up. He had to have been doing something to keep this in his name. He could have sold it at any time if he really wanted to get rid of it. the fact that he held on to it until he had a real reason to get rid of it makes me think that while he may have hated it, it still held a special place in his heart. What little is left of his heart at this point. But just seeing him and M and the gamekeeper, booby trapping it, sabotaging it, and ultimately blowing it to tiny little bits was just a fantastic scene, an ultimate climax for a Bond movie, and just beautifully, beautifully done. So that's why my number one is the Skyfall Estate.
I can understand your reasoning. It didn't fit in with mine, but I get it. I can see that. Now, with that in mind, having concluded our list of combined neutral and friendly venues, is there anything that you ended up having to hack off your list or wanted to consider that you kind of wish would have been there? Do you have any honorable mentions you want to toss out here?
Oh, definitely. There were a few that, as I was combining my lists and paring things down, I just couldn't find a space for on the top 15. A couple of the ones that you had on your list that didn't make mine, such as Bond's Flat and Felix Leiter's house. Those things were definitely good locations, and exactly for the reasons you mentioned, that it really gave us a glimpse into the persona that is those characters. Ultimately, they didn't make the list because just not enough happened there to end up in my top 15. But for the reasons you stated, they're definitely worth of an honorable mention at the very least. Also, I didn't include. I think there were a couple other locations that I had previously had on my list that I wanted to include this time around, but it just didn't have the room for it. One of which is the Opera Hall in Quantum of Solace. For much the same reason as the pyramids were such a great scene, the way that they did the show, essentially in the foreground on equal footing with the action, I really liked the way they did that. But ultimately, that one didn't make the list either, but I would give it an honorable mention.
Fair enough. One that I'd like to give an honorable mention to, and I really wanted to include it, but it was hard once we combined the list to get it on there, and that is the Shrublands from Thunderball, just because it was such a very effective use of a location, not just because, okay, it's a place where Bond can be, but why he's there. He's being sent there for rehab, and he's not being given a choice. And so he's there, and they do a lot of interesting things with it that can't happen anywhere else. Like, he almost gets killed on this piece of exercise equipment that's supposed to be stretching him out. And the only reason he doesn't get killed is because the nurse saves his ass. And then you have the use of the Turkish baths. You just have a lot of good use of a location, and it didn't quite crack the top 15, but it was used well enough that I wanted to give it a mention. And then another one that I wanted to give a mention to, from Never Say Never Again, I don't think we're ever given an actual name for it, but the Rich People's Arcade Ballroom, specifically because it played host to the two best scenes in the movie, which were the video game of the eternal domination of the world, which is just awesome to watch. And then the results of that, Bond winning his bet, is to have the ability to dance with Domino. The tango scene in the ballroom, again, just fantastic. I really wanted to include that, but once we combined the list, it just couldn't happen.
Fair enough. That is a good location. It's hard for me to think of Never Say Never Again and think of good things to say about it. So sometimes those locations, even though they were good within that film, they slip my mind. But that arcade was pretty awesome. I will definitely say that.
And then one more as well, just as a shout out. Q's Lab is always fun, and it was hard not to include some of Q's Labs just because they're so cool. The only one I could include that, other than, of course, the bad one from Die Another Day, was stuck in with all of modern MI6. But even though it didn't have the best gadgets in it, I think the best gadget version of Q's Lab was the Living Daylights, just because it had the Ghetto Blaster and his lunch. But I also really liked Q's Lab inside the Egyptian ruins safe house in The Spy Who Loved Me, especially because you had that, because I would have combined that with how you got into the place to begin with. I mean, it's in Egyptian ruins, which are just cool to begin. Then you talk to Moneypenny, go right in, and the first thing Bond sees is General Gogol. mean, how cool is that?
Like, wait a minute. What's going on here?
So those are my honorable mentions.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. It was definitely harder to pare down this list than I originally thought it would be. But at the same time, I'm glad that we got to do 15 on the bad guys' lairs, because that list was very easy to fill. So we'll definitely have some fun talking about those.
Indeed we will. But before we get to the top 15 villain venues, we do have to take care of the matter of the most ridiculous villain venue out there. So,
yes.
I don't think that either of us had a very hard time with this one, my psychic powers are telling me.
No, not at all. This one was a very easy choice.
So, kind of suspecting that we're probably going to think along the same lines, thinking of the discussions that we've had in the past. What was your choice, sir?
My choice was the Ice Palace from Die Another Day. That place was just dumb. It was just ridiculous. I mean, absolutely crazy. And it not just the fact that it existed and was being used, but then the way they used it. You know, having a car chase through the thing. It was awful. It was just everything about it was bad.
I completely agree with you. And as I rather suspected, considering the vitriol with which we discussed it during our Die Another Day episode, I too picked the Ice Palace from Die Another Day. The only thing that came even close was the let's change your DNA into that of a white guy clinic from the same movie. But the Ice Palace got more use, and it's just stupid. It's like the bookend to what we picked for the most ridiculous neutral venue. On the one hand, you have the Palace de las Dunas, which is Travel Channel cool, out in the middle of nowhere in a desert surrounded by nothing. And then you have an Ice Palace, the real ones of which are Travel Channel cool, but which cannot exist in Iceland because it's not cold enough.
That was the most ridiculous part of it, the fact that it was supposed to be taking place in Iceland. And, I mean, do they just think that everybody watching the movie is completely and utterly stupid?
Yes.
That they're going to get their... Oh, if we say that it's in Greenland, they're going to wonder why there's ice there. But if we say it's in Iceland, they'll understand, because Iceland must have ice, right? Anybody who's gone through third grade geography...
Come on.
Anybody who's gone through third grade geography knows better than this. And I would hope that anybody watching a Bond flick, it's PG-13, so hopefully they've at least been through third grade geography, you know what I mean?
Unfortunately, considering what's taught in a lot of third grade geography, my hopes aren't up. But no, it was just, as you said, just the use to which it was put was just phenomenally bad. I mean, especially with the Zomji laser from the Death Star satellite trying to melt the thing while Bond is driving through in The Vanish, trying to rescue Halle Berry for some strange reason. It was just bad. I mean, I can't think of anything that I like about this Ice Palace except that, Rosamund Pike went to bed in it, but, you know.
It looked cool, you know, like from the outside. I mean, you could give it that, I suppose, but really beyond that, there's not really a whole lot that it's got going on for it.
It really doesn't. It was just interesting concept, poor execution, and just, no, a waste. So yes, most ridiculous Bond venue, the Ice Palace from Die Another Day.
Woohoo!
Which brings us to the good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
The stuff that everybody likes to think of when they're looking at locations in James Bond movies. And that is the villainous venues. The places that the bad guys own, control, and do their dastardly deeds in. So, how did you start off your top 15 list, sir?
My top 15 list starts with number 15.
Imagine that.
No, my number 15 on the list. I went with one that now... The villain in this movie was not, or this particular villain especially, was not great. Not one of my favorite villains by far, but I loved his house and his little setup that he had going on with the miniatures and the everything that had been going on. I went with Whitaker's house from The Living Daylights. The character is ridiculous. The character is not good. The character is bad. Really, if we look at it objectively, it's not a good character at all. But his house was fun. He had the miniature sets. He had everything with the battle reenactment things going on. I mean, he was just a big kid at heart. He had all his toys and stuff, and not to mention an arsenal of weaponry and such as well, which is always good to have along with your little toys. You should always keep the guns right next to the toys. I mean, that's just common sense, really, right? But no, it was just a fun place, and it's the kind of place I would love to visit that place and have fun in there without having to interact with that person in any way, shape, or form. Not on the same side or the other side. I just don't want to interact with Whitaker at all. But his house was cool.
I just can't go there, and the main reason that I can't is much like, as we described on our earlier list in this episode, Felix Leiter's house is an expression of who Felix Leiter is, and Bond's flat is an expression of who he is. Whitaker's place is a reflection of who he is, and that's some wannabe armchair general douchebag. And that personality type is so entrenched in this particular house, I can't include it on the list. And especially since I have seen this type of place done for other archetypes just like him, whether they were lifting from the Living Daylight specifically or whether it was just this same kind of character. There's a really, really awful Michael Dudikoff flick called Avenging Force. It's the sequel to Invasion USA with Chuck Norris. It's just bad, and the same kind of house is built in there. And another film along a similar vein, in fact, I have an idea of maybe having us discuss this at some point. There's a Brandon Lee flick, one of only 6, called Laser Mission, which is basically a parody James Bond flick, and the villain has a house like this. But I understand your reasoning. I just can't go with it.
We will have to have an episode at some point that focuses on not the direct spin-offs and spoofs, but films and such that were obviously or directly inspired by Bond.
I can think of at least 2 or 3 different ways we can go with those. So we may have several episodes like that in the future.
Awesome. Hey, that works for me. So what did you have then at your number 15 spot for the villainous hideouts?
My number 15 is from another villain who, and this is kind of like a sideways villain. He's not the major villain of the movie, but he's not a henchman. He's someone in league with the villain. And the way the scene fits into the movie is kind of dumb, but they had the right idea. And what I'm thinking of specifically is High Fat's karate school in The Man with the Golden Gun. That was put in there specifically, of course, because of the sudden popularity of Asian martial arts to Western audiences with Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon suddenly coming into the fray. And finally the porting of realistic style martial arts and karate schools and so on. So they thought, hey, we need to capitalize on this. It was one of the ways in which the movie was aware of its own time, even as it ignored so much else. And the concept of Bond waking up in a karate school and having to go through, watch the bad hench people have little duels with each other and then come out and be expected to get his ass kicked. And the concept of it was great. Execution, not so much, especially when it came time for the nieces to show up and save the day while Bond just stood there with his arms folded. But the concept of High Fat's karate school was cool. So that's my number 15.
All right. I will admit that one escaped my list. It didn't quite make it onto my list, but it is a good one. I don't fault you for that choice at all.
Now, as for my number 14, I think this is something you'll appreciate. It is Max Zorin's big blimp from A View to a Kill. Now, he had 2 blimps.
Yeah, he had the small airship.
He had the big one, which had, of course, the boardroom that was a ripoff of something from Goldfinger, and the chance for someone to drop out. It was basically like his own little mini headquarters that could fly in the blimp. You didn't get to see a whole lot of it, but just the fact that a villain had a blimp headquarters of some sort is just too damn cool.
Oh, I completely agree. Zorin's blimp definitely made my list as well, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But yeah, I don't fault you for that choice whatsoever. And in fact, I applaud it, sir.
Yeah, I just had to include it. Now, quick bit of trivia for you. When you look at the blimps you're actually only ever seeing one side of the blimp. They could only afford to paint one side because they were running out of money. So it's camera tricks if it's flipped
movie
over.
magic. We like to call that movie magic, not camera tricks. Camera tricks sound like they're trying to get away with something. Movie magic means they're astonishing you. No.
So, what astonished you at number 14, sir?
Number 14 was the completely and utterly absurd, but still really cool Cuba satellite dish facility from GoldenEye. No, they did not need a satellite dish big enough to pick up interstellar radio waves, which is what that satellite dish actually is for, to control a satellite that's orbiting the Earth. You can use a very, very small satellite dish, as a matter of fact, to communicate with a satellite that's orbiting Earth. But it was still awesome. I mean, the way they had it designed to, it was hidden in a lake, and then it came up out of the water to be used, and, they flew over the thing 10 times without being able to see it and know that it was there. And of course, nobody else knew that it was there. Somehow, the entire construction project of the dish escaped anyone's notice. But hey, that's cool. But it was all really cool tech stuff inside. The satellite controls. They had the duplicate of the GoldenEye control room from the Russian satellite outpost,
Conveniently located next to liquid nitrogen tanks.
Of course. Well, because because that was one of the best parts, when the liquid nitrogen tanks explode and cover Boris, and he's up there, I am invincible! And then he gets broken into tiny little pieces, which, also not realistic. It would take a lot more exposure to liquid nitrogen to freeze a human solid enough to actually break up like that. It's been proven. But anyways, that's not the point. Again, movie magic we're talking about here. And I just really
I will
like
say,
that
though, that that's
facility.
only the second best liquid nitrogen blow-up I've ever seen in a movie. The first was when they killed Jason Voorhees that way for the first time in Jason X.
Oh. I haven't seen that. I'm not a big horror fan, so especially I'll watch some of the originals. I think I've seen the first 3, maybe Nightmare on Elm Streets. But after that, I just lost interest. And anything that goes to the point where they're literally Jason X, I'm like, nah, I'm done. I was done a long time ago.
Oh, fair enough.
I might check it out at some point. If it pops up on Netflix and I'm bored one night, you never know. I'd like to check those things out to see. I'm more into psychological thrillers than I am to horror movies.
There's nothing psychological about this. This is just very self-aware, making fun of itself and knowing it's the last in the series, so it's going out with a bang. But as far as your choice for the dish in GoldenEye, I understand why it's there, both because of your grand affinity for the film, and yeah, it's a cool set, and hey, props to them using the Arecibo radio telescope, which for those of you who have SETI at home on your computer, that's where a lot of your signals that you're analyzing came from. Mm-hmm. So hopefully they got a nice little grant in order to use that location, because, hey, they can use the money. Yeah. That said, it is not on my list.
Ooh, that's all right.
But moving on to your lucky 13, what did you have?
Lucky number 13. For me, my lucky number 13 was the White House penthouse in Diamonds Are Forever. I really like the idea of a villainous lair in the top floor of a Vegas casino hotel, because I'm pretty sure most of them kind of are evil lairs. So it seems realistic enough to me. Obviously, he had bigger plans than just cheating people out of their money at the craps table, but it was still a very cool setup. Lots of fun toys and tricks and stuff, and of course the doppelgangers to and everything else going on. Voice changing devices, and just a really fun set, really interesting. And I like the fact that it's in a Vegas penthouse as well.
I like the bathroom.
The bathroom was great. So
it's not on my list, but the bathroom is great.
Not just the bathroom, just the bathroom all by itself. No, all right.
No, the whole thing was cool, and it was actually very close. It almost made my list. It was the last thing I took off, actually. So I get where you're coming from. I just didn't end up going there.
All right. Well, what did you have at number 13 then?
For number 13, a lot of villains in Bond movies have some kind of chateau. Zorin had one, Drax had one. But the one to me that stands out just because it's got that little extra bit of unique to it, and it is actually a real place that they converted into a set, and that would be Kamal Khan's Monsoon Palace in Octopussy.
Oh.
Just because it's a chateau, but it's a chateau in India. and therefore, of course, not the French chateau design, so I'm using the term incorrectly. But, just the grand maison, the grand house. And, hey, it's got hunting grounds that you use elephants to track shit in the back. So it's got a dungeon. It's just really cool. So, and I really like the architecture. I like how they made use of it, not just to show off how Kamal Khan was, very wealthy, well off. You have Bond sliding down the banister, and of course, because there's always something at the bottom of it when somebody's sliding down crotch first, he's got to shoot that out of the way. But I also like how it was used in the invasion at the end, where the circus comes in. So I just really liked how it made its way into the movie. So the Monsoon Palace from Octopussy is my number 13.
All right. I don't fault the choice at all. It escaped my notice, so it didn't end up on my list. It didn't jump to the front of my mind when I was thinking of things. So there are probably things on your list that are not on my list simply because I forgot about them that would have been on the list had I remembered them. I kind of chose I'm like, which ones jump out in my memory first? Because obviously those ones are the ones I'm thinking about more. So those ones are the ones that made it first on my list. But no, good choice. Good choice. I like it.
Now, as for my number 12, this is something I had to consider as whether or not it was a villainous venue, but the more I think about it, it's made reasonably clear that even though it falls under the wholly owned subsidiary category, it still is owned by the villain. And therefore, I went with the Vanini Glass Factory in Moonraker. Because, okay, we had to have the ridiculous bull in a china shop fight somewhere.
Absolutely.
We might as well have it in the museum at the Glass Factory. And I thought that turned out very well, not only at the bottom when we're swinging glass-handled swords and knocking over every single piece of glass in the entire joint, but then going upstairs and knocking him through the glass clock face as well. And then, of course, inside the same factory, because it's still attached, we have first the lab in which the bad guy's nefarious satellites are being built, and then when we come to arrest him the next day, where he is entertaining a couple of women with a piano recital. So it was just very, very well done. I really liked it. There's just some great signature moments that occur there. Mm-hmm. So the Vanini Glass Factory from Moonraker is my number 12.
Okay. Again, that's one I didn't really think of, mostly because, like you said, it doesn't jump out at you as a villainous lair. It is definitely a villainous venue, though, because you're right, he was completely and wholly controlled by the bad guys and owned by them, so it would not count as a neutral location, definitely. So, all right.
So what's in your dozen position?
For me, number 12 was one that you already mentioned, and that was Zorn's blimp from A View to a Kill. All the reasons you mentioned and more, I love this blimp. First of all, it's a freaking blimp. I mean, come on. That's just cool. And the fact that he did have the small one to go along with it actually helps boost the big one's potential for me, because I'm thinking like, oh, this guy could have like a whole fleet of blimps. If he has his way and like ends up ruling Silicon Valley and the world like he wants, I'm just imagining blimps everywhere. And as we know from Fringe, blimps everywhere is pretty darn cool, even if the future that in which that takes place isn't that great. But still, the blimp part is cool.
Well, hey, the entire steampunk universe is applauding right now.
Exactly. I just love the idea of using a blimp as a transportable hideout like that, along with a conference room, and easy disposal of anybody who doesn't agree with your plan. Just drop them out of the blimp. So that's why my number 12 is Zorn's blimp.
All right. Now, what about your number 11, sir?
Going down to number 11, I chose the Disco Volante from Thunderball. We had talked about, something the size of a yacht or bigger is a venue as opposed to a vehicle. And so the Disco Volante is my number 11 villainous venue. That's just a darn cool boat. A giant yacht that also separates into a speedboat. It's reminiscent of my Star Trek Next Generation days, and the saucer section separating from the the battle section of the Enterprise. And I love that kind of thing. I've always been into Transformers and anything that was one thing and becomes something else. So that's why the Disco Volante made my list and made it all the way to number 11.
We'll discuss this in a minute.
Okay, all right. Until we get there, what is your number 11?
My number 11, I expect to get a lot of flack from this, especially from members of the audience, and specifically because I have it so low.
Okay.
And that is Atlantis from The Spy Who Loved Me. That would be the, of course, villain's city beneath the sea, which can rise up out of the ocean, sink back down, even though everybody knows where it is. He just has it do that anyway because it looks freaking cool. And, that part I'm okay with. And apparently it was actually based on the design of something that some Japanese dude was building, but that never quite worked out, and so they couldn't film there, and then it went bust. But the reason that even though it's such a cool concept, and of course it's got sharks, frickin' sharks. I mean, you can't go wrong with sharks.
I love sharks.
But the problem that I have with Atlantis is that they split the cool and they put most of the cool in that oil tanker. So when you actually look at Atlantis itself, even when you see the little model that you have of it when they first start taking the tour, there's really not a whole lot of room to do anything, and certainly not to house your seafaring master race while you're waiting for the world to blow itself up. I mean, there's just not enough little modules attached to it. There, you have Stromberg's dining room, which I'm convinced he sleeps in, a couple of small dungeons, a big-ass shark tank that looks like it takes up most of the place. There's just not much room for anything. Whereas the actual war room, the submarine pens, the monorail, all that cool stuff, that's on the oil tanker. And I think that by diluting what could have been with Atlantis, they lessened it. So that's why it's all the way down at 11. It's signature, but it's not as signature as it should have been.
All right. I understand your reasoning. I will admit that Atlantis did make it higher on my list. And mostly because I kind of separated a lot of the cool stuff did happen on the tanker, but at the same time, Atlantis is just really cool to me. And we'll discuss that a little bit more here in a little bit. That brings us up to the top 10.
It does. And my number 10 is The Flying Saucer from Never Say Never Again, which, of course, is Disco Volante in English. Because, they decided that audiences weren't quite as sophisticated 20 years later.
Evidently.
But it has become something of a signature thing for some baddies to have some pimpin' yachts out there. We've seen it in License to Kill. Of course, we saw it in Thunderball, because Never Say Never Again is a complete rip of it.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't pick it from Thunderball is I thought it was underwhelming. Because, you had the thing split, but the way that it split in the movie was just kind of dumb. Because, you had the gun platform that was left behind and blown up almost immediately. And it just seemed such a waste. It seemed you got more of a bang out of Bond throwing the oil barrels out of the back of the little boat in From Russia with Love. Whereas the Flying Saucer, Never Say Never Again, it's the pimp's pimp boat. It's got the porn aerobic section, which you can watch from the little secret hideaway behind the two-way mirror. And you've got the whole war room in there from which you can run a small country. It's just a nice looking frickin' yacht. And of course, all the standard amenities like secret compartment down below from which you can salvage nuclear weapons and so on. And it was just cool. And if you're going to have a bad guy yacht, this is a good bad guy yacht. And extra trivia for you. If you watch the end credits of Thunderball, one of the things it says there is thanks AK. And that is thanks Adnan Khashoggi. That's the real gentleman who owns the actual yacht, the Flying Saucer. Not what he called it, but that's what they used for it. Now, the interiors, of course, were studio built, but outside that's his. And if you're wondering why you've heard that name before, he was the middleman in the Iran-Contra affair between selling arms for hostages between the United States and Iran.
Typical.
Bond villain actually owns a Bond villain yacht. What do you know?
Oh, what do you know? Yeah, that is kind of crazy. I didn't know that about the yacht that you actually used in the movie. But that's pretty funny.
So what do you have at number 10, sir?
Cracking my top 10 list. Now, this is not a reflection of the quality of the film. We've already made our feelings on this film quite clear in the past, but the villainous venue in this particular one was still fantastic, despite all the chicken loving. And that would be His Gloria from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was absolutely ridiculous how it was being used. I mean, trying to, okay, first of all, you're brainwashing people into not being allergic to stuff. That's, okay, first of all, you don't even know how allergies work, so I don't trust anything you say from here on out. And then you love the chickens.
You love chickens.
And the fact that none of the rooms were secure in any way, shape, or form, but it was still a very cool setup. I mean, the mountaintop estate. Yeah, you could do, and it had shuffleboard, and it had, its own. It was just a fun place, and as a villain goes, that particular movie, it kind of fell flat, but as a venue goes, it was just darn cool. So that's how Piz, is it Piz or is it pronounced funny?
Piz Gloria.
It is Piz Gloria? Okay. I kept looking at it going, it can't just be Piz. That can't be how it's actually pronounced, is it? Well, okay.
That's how they pronounced it in the movie.
Well then.
And it is actually a real place.
Oh, yeah. Which would be cool to visit someday. That's another one of those locations I'd love to go check out someday. I'd like to fly over Perla de la Lunas and just look at it. I don't want to stop there for any reason. My building might blow up if I step foot in it. Everything's so unstable there. But it would be cool to see, in person. Maybe take a helicopter ride over it or something like that. That might be cool. But Piz Gloria I would definitely want to visit and maybe spend some time in. And so that's why I made my top 10 list at number 10.
Just be careful with the wall art. It might kill you. But that was one that I considered. I ultimately left it off. I don't think I left it off because of the chickens, but that might have been in there somewhere. But yeah, it just didn't quite make it for me.
Well, that makes me sad. I'm going to have to brainwash you in your sleep into loving Piz Gloria.
I don't think you get quite the silky smooth tones of Telly Savalas.
Dang it. All right. I'll have to hire him. I'm sure he's looking for work. I don't know what's going on.
So what do you have at number 9, sir?
Moving up to number 9, into the single digits on the list, I have the Stud Ranch from Goldfinger. Goldfinger's Stud Ranch, I suppose. I don't remember if it had a name.
Auric Stud.
Oh, that makes sense. Being that he was Auric Goldfinger. So I would say Auric Stud, the Stud Ranch from Goldfinger. I just thought it was really cool. Obviously, he had all the fun toys. He had the tables that turned into maps, and the walls, the maps coming in. Hey, what's that map doing there? It had, poisonous gas dispensers conveniently hidden in a desk or something. It had, a dungeon and cells and all that fun stuff. So it basically was a great villain lair. It had everything you could want, especially the main meeting room, where everything turned into something else. It was fantastic. So that's why his Stud Ranch makes it onto my top 9.
I understand, and we'll talk about it later.
So what then did you have in the numero 9?
At my number 9 spot, and again, I might catch some flack for putting it so low on my list, but it's not because it's bad, it's because we got a bunch of really cool stuff ahead of it. And that would be the original Bond villain lair, Crab Key from Dr. No, which for some reason they decided to make into a faux bauxite mine rather than a faux guano factory, as it was in the book. I can't imagine why they did that.
Probably because they'd have to explain to audiences what guano was, and since Ace Ventura hadn't come out yet, nobody knew what that was yet. So,
well, shit.
They didn't. But I see what you did there.
But I mean, this place is just cool. I mean, you got the decontamination showers. You've got, the nice little secure hotel space from which no one can escape. Slightly more secure than Piz Gloria. No chickens. And
I love the chickens.
You have the really, really cool dining room that would end up being ripped off a little bit later, of course, by Stromberg for Atlantis. And then the thing that I admit kind of knocks it down for me, even though it's cheesy and cool, the open-air nuclear reactor.
Wait, isn't that how they really are? That's not real?
No.
I jest. No, yeah, I love that facility. And again, it's kind of the original. It's kind of the template for future bad guys' lairs. So definitely not going to fault you for your choice. And I mean, honestly, we're in the top 10 here, so we're in the good stuff already. There's not going to be much separation. I will say that Krabkey managed to make it a little bit higher on my list, so we'll get to it in just a little bit, but I don't think it's too far down on the list, quite honestly. That'll just depend on what you decided to put in front of it, I suppose.
Well, at number 8, what I put directly in front of it is something that's just so much fun. I had to put it there. Even though the person who ostensibly runs it may or may not have any idea just how much of a villainous lair it really is. Maybe he knows, maybe he doesn't. He knows he's running some kind of scam, though, and that would be the Olympotech Meditation Institute from License to Kill. Above ground, you have Professor Joe Butcher's TV evangelist scam, and below ground, you have Franz Sanchez's cocaine factory. And that is just cool.
And
that is some of the most brilliant writing in the entire series to me.
And I'm not sure which one of those two ventures I think is more criminal.
I think they both are pretty equal.
Yeah.
But I will say it, between the two, out of all the sleazy TV evangelists I've ever seen out there, Professor Joe Butcher is actually kind of cool. I mean, especially when, he's running away and Pam's driving by in the little golf cart. She reaches out, grabs her money back, and he just looks at her and says, "Bless your heart." And he means it. But just the idea that you have this quote-unquote ancient temple rebuilt stone by stone from which this scam is being run, and it's actually the cover for a cocaine operation. I mean, the logistics behind how they use that cover we've discussed at length when talking about License to Kill, but just the entire setup in general. It's just awesome. I love it. So, at my number 8, the Olympotech Meditation Institute from License to Kill.
All right. I will admit that one did not make my list, but probably mostly because I wasn't thinking about it. If I'd been thinking about it, it may have very well made the list. But what did make my list at number 8, and this is one that actually, this one seems to catch some hell out there in the internet universe, as far as being, some people consider this to be a great villainous location, and other people consider it to be a lame villainous location. And I can't even imagine that, because I just thought it was so much fun and such a weird insight into this particular mind that we're dealing with here. And that was Scaramanga's Funhouse, and really his whole facility, but especially the Funhouse in The Man with the Golden Gun. I thought it was such a great glimpse into the crazy, because most of what we see from Scaramanga is his very, very controlled persona. Everything has to be exactly the way he wants it. He's very controlled. One shot, one kill every time. That's the way he is. Everything has to be exactly in place. And you contrast that to the chaos that is a fun house like that. It really kind of speaks to the madness inside, to me personally. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I don't know, but I liked it, and so that is my number 8.
I don't think you're reading too much into it, and we'll discuss that later.
So then that moves us on to number 007.
It does. And what do you have at number 007, sir?
At my number 007, I had the Palmyra Estate from Thunderball. This was just a fun location. It was a great-looking facility. It was just, had everything that a villain's lair needs to have, including sharks. You gotta have sharks if you want a successful Bond villain lair. You've got to have sharks. It's simply required. And so I just really liked this facility, and I thought it was really well done. And the scenes in which we got to see it were very well done as well. And they put it to great use in the film. So that's why it made my number 7 list.
I admit that did not make my list, despite the sharks. But I can't fault you for your choice.
What did you have at the 007 position on your list?
At the 007 position in my list, in theory, it's not just one place. It's a chain of places, but they're all villainous venues, and you can have a nasty turn no matter where you sit, whether it's in a booth or at the stage, and that would be the Filet of Soul restaurants in Live and Let Die, from which Mr. Big / Kananga runs his drug distribution operations in the United States. This is just this is just cool. I like the idea of the converting hideout where you've got the innocuous storefront and then it turns out that you've got this hidden stuff underneath it, whether it's for good guys or bad guys. And the idea of a soul restaurant that has this layer down below from which you can either make honkies disappear, using that word as the movie does, of course, or run your villainous operations, or have your tarot readings done at knife point. It's just cool. I just really get a kick out of it whenever I see them. So, Filet of Soul Restaurants from Live and Let Die are my number 7.
All right. I will admit they did not make my list, but it is a cool idea, and it's a fun little. Especially, it fits so well into that movie. You know, any other Bond flick that would not have worked, but in that one, it definitely worked out perfectly. So, not a bad choice.
All right. Now, for number 6, I liked a lot about this movie. So I'm going to be revisiting something we've already talked about movie-wise, and that would be the converted ancient ruins used by Hugo Drax to launch the Moonrakers from in Moonraker. Doesn't really have a name, so I just wrote it up as Drax's converted ancient ruins. We know that it's some kind of ancient temple in the middle of the jungle, complete with not sharks, not piranhas, but swimming pythons. So that works. It's cool. I'll go with it. And I just really like how they combined the look of ancient architecture in a way that's believable to having been made into the launch point for space shuttles. And it is actually a logical launch point for space shuttles geographically because the best way to launch into Earth orbit is from being as close to the equator as possible. Just because because of the rotation of the Earth, you'll actually be going at greater speed just naturally than you would if you were going from further north or further south.
Right.
So as close to the equator as possible. In this case, the jungle would be a good idea. But just that aspect, the architecture of it. I also like how that little conference room that Bond and Dr. Goodhead are supposed to get cooked in looks a lot like the one from the Death Star in Star Wars. Just all around, very, very cool layer. So I went with Drax's converted ancient ruins from Moonraker at my number 6.
All right. I will admit that one is not on my list. I do have an item from Moonraker higher on my list, but not that one. For me, though, at number 6, I have, and I know you don't really agree with this when we had discussed this one previously when we discussed this movie, but I really thought it was a cool idea, and I liked the way that it was put to use, even though you thought it was kind of bland and boring according to our discussion earlier. But that would be Silva's abandoned island in Skyfall. I thought it was really a cool idea that he had basically said, I want this island, so I'm going to convince all these people to leave. And he did. He got everybody off, and now it's his. And yeah, the only thing we really see there is a few empty streets and the one room where he's got the servers set up. The
world's shittiest server room is the way I like to think about it.
Yeah,
it's hot and dusty in there. I mean, those. Yeah, the only worst place you could put a bunch of servers is a bank vault.
Yeah. There was definitely they needed some AC, they needed some air filtration, some air cleaners going in there. But it was still cool to see because it fit the character. It was basically like he's got all this space, but all he really needs are these computers right here, and that's where he's doing all of his damage from, and that fit the character and what he was about. So I was okay with it, and I just like the idea of having just this island where he's instead of you get enough money you can go buy an island, I suppose, but he was like, no, I like this one, I'm gonna take it, and just did. So that's why it made it to my list, and all the way up to number 6 is Silva's Island in Skyfall.
I understand the concept, and I'm not going to give you hell for it. I just can't. I agree with the reasons you're coming up with. It's just I can't see it that way because yeah, it reflects his personality, but he's a dull husk of a human being. So, and that's just crappy server room. Dude, bring Carson over there for a week. Come on. Purple, furniture, upholstery, something. Even a whips and chains dungeon. I don't care. Just get a personality. Something. Art. Something. Anything. So, yeah, I admit one of the reasons I'm not as keen on it is because of a lack of an interior decorator. But I get what you're saying.
All right. So what's next on your list?
Well, that cracks our top 5 now. And for my number 5, specifically the version we saw in Thunderball. There's just no way I could not include this. The headquarters for the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. In other words, Spectre HQ, hiding inside of an innocuous charitable organization in the middle of Europe. But once you get past the doors, this is where Ernst Stavro Blofeld, a.k.a. Number One, and his Persian cat do their dirty deeds, have their meetings with the board, and launch plans to steal nuclear weapons and make lots of money. And I just thought this was the most complete look at it that we ever got.
Yeah, that's true. Thinking back, we get little bits and pieces. We get a few what seemed to be almost more like offices later on, but that was the first time and probably the only time we've gotten to see a really good look at the conference room, so to speak, and that kind of thing. And it was really, really well done. And
I like the cover story up front that we actually got to see the workings of it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, when they go through and they're listing off what they've done.
The Organization for Stateless Persons. That was just cool.
Yeah.
So that's why Spectre HQ, kind of had to make the list somewhere for me. So it made it to number 5.
And you know what's funny is I actually thought of that, and it was... I don't know how it didn't end up on my list, honestly, because it was in my mind, and I think I may have even written it down at one point at one version of my list, and somehow it didn't end up on the final, and I'm not quite sure why. I think it just randomly got bumped.
You silly man!
I don't know what happened.
So what did you do at number 5 then, you silly man?
Well, at number 5, we've got another one that we've discussed previously, and that would be the Crab Key facility from Dr. No. Again, like you said, it was one of the first that we saw in the movies of a bad guy's lair, and it was very well done. I mean, yeah, okay, you get this weird open-air nuclear reactor or whatever, but I'm sure at the time most people didn't know what the heck a nuclear reactor looked like, so I'm sure they were okay with it. They're like, yeah, that's... Everybody keeps telling me nuclear power is dangerous, so I guess that's what it looks like. That makes sense. Now I know why it's so dangerous.
Well, we should send Denise Richards in there as Christmas Jones to check it out.
Please drop her in the pit. It made it higher on my list because, partly just by virtue of it being one of the first that we've seen and being kind of the template for future bad guys hideouts later on in the series. So, Crab Key facility from Dr. No cracks my top 5.
All right. And what about your number 4?
Moving on to number 4 is another one that you've mentioned previously. This one was way further down on your list. This is probably one of the biggest gaps, I think, of any that we both have so far. And that is the Atlantis facility from The Spy Who Loved Me. I like this facility a lot more than you seem to. I mean, yeah, you liked it enough to put it on the list, but I've got it at number 4 because even though, yes, some of the cool stuff we saw was in the oil tanker, not in the actual Atlantis facility, I still really dig the Atlantis facility. And I'm just going to assume, based on everything that we did see, that there was more that we didn't see somewhere. But I don't know. But what we did see was awesome. I love the wake. I mean, yes, it's totally unnecessary for it to rise up and down out of the water. Completely unnecessary. There's no useful purpose for that whatsoever.
Oh, yeah, and that part I have no trouble with because it's cool.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't even bother me that doesn't have any useful purpose because it's fun and it's cool. And I just really like the look of it. And it was one of those things that, you've got basically a very similar plot line to other films where you've got the bad guy wants to have his master race separate from the rest of the world that's going to kill itself off or be killed by them. And so this one, some movies might take him to space. This movie went underwater, hey. But either way, the moral to the story is Bond's going to foil your plan, no matter how cool your facility is. But for me, Atlantis was cool enough to make it into the top 4. So Atlantis from The Spy Who Loved Me is my number 4.
My personal theory is that the reason that Atlantis is so small, even though it's supposed to handle the master race, is that it's really not going to, because all Stromberg really wants to make sure is that his personal chef makes it. So that's all he's ever interested in, is moving his butt from the couch to the dinner table. And that's it. I mean, I one of the things I found unbelievable was that he had any interest in Agent XXX, because I just can't imagine him being that interested in sex. But for my number 4... I went with something that you had lower down on your list, and which I don't understand the heat that a lot of people give this, and that is Scaramanga's Island, including the funhouse from The Man with the Golden Gun.
Awesome.
No, I don't particularly like this movie, but this is the part of the movie I like. And it fits his personality perfectly. In fact, it fits the initial characterization of Scaramanga perfectly, not just as we see him interpreted by the powers that be at Eon and then further by actor Christopher Lee in a brilliant performance, but also Ian Fleming's own biography for the character, which Christopher Lee quotes almost verbatim in his dialogue. And that is, of course, a fun house will mean something to him because he grew up in a frickin' circus. So, yeah, circus atmosphere. This makes sense. And as he tells the story, this is where his personality was formed. This is where he discovered that he didn't just want to be a trick shot artist. He liked killing people. He discovered that at the circus. So, having his own facility that has its own funhouse run by a midget.
Of course.
And its own Zomji solar power factory with a Death Star super laser attached. I have no problem with this. I think it's a fantastic villainous venue. And so that's why it makes my number 4. And it was actually a really close race to keep this as far down for me as number 4.
All right. Well, I'm definitely not going to fault you for that. I had that just at number 8. So not too much separation. We both had it in the top 10 and both think it's a fantastic venue. So good choice.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, another one that I have that you had further down on your list at number 3, and I admit a lot of this is sentiment, and that is RX Stud, Goldfinger Stud Farm from Goldfinger. Why? Well, aside from the fact that it has a dungeon, it has a place to roll in the hay with pussy galore, the main thing that this has is the ultimate freaking villain man cave. I mean, it's the bad guy rec room from hell. It's a bar with a gigantic pool table, yeah, but then the floor moves and Goldfinger's just flipping switches like a little kid in a candy store showing off the coolest Lego set ever. He's just having a blast. The map shows up on the wall. The model comes up out of the floor. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it's silly, but holy shit, it's cool. I want one. I don't know what I'd have the map be of yet. I'd have to think about it. It's just so cool, and it's trend setting. Every self-respecting villain has to have one of these. So, just for the sake of the ultimate bad guy man cave, RX Stud from Goldfinger had to be my number 3.
Awesome. Well, I definitely can't fault you on that. Like I said, I had that one just at number 9. So again, not a whole lot of separation here between them. And yeah, it was a great venue, and especially with all the tricks and everything else going on there. I mean, you couldn't not have that on the list somewhere, and it definitely had to be fairly high up on the list. I mean, we're definitely talking about the best of the best here now. So there's really no going wrong here. And that was a fantastic venue, and especially that particular room. I love that room, even if plus, that was I think that was the best thing Goldfinger ever did happened in that room. He gathered like a bunch of the world's worst criminals together and killed them all. So,
he's good guy Goldfinger.
Yeah, good guy Goldfinger. Good for him. At least he did something good with his life, right? So, and that room played a key part in it. So I don't fault that choice in any way, shape, or form. Good call.
So what do you have at number 3, sir?
So bringing me to my top 3, I have one from one of my favorite films, and I just love the idea of this, and I especially love the villainess's reaction when she discovers that Bond is going to derail it with a tank, and that is the ICBM train from GoldenEye. I love this train. It just looks mean. It's just a mean-looking train. It's all armored up. It's all, like, oh, I don't want to mess with that train. I'm not trying to hop a ride on that. I'm not doing that.
They're going to derail us.
Oh, man. And then you have, you've got the computer room in it. You've got the, all the different spaces within the train. And
the helicopter car.
Yeah, you've got a helicopter on it. Everything about this train is awesome. So I definitely had to put it in my list. It had to be way up high. So that's my number 3, the armored ICBM train from GoldenEye.
It's cool, and it's not on my list at all.
Son of a gun. I'll forgive you just this once.
Now, with our top 2, I'm pretty sure I know exactly which 2 both of us have. But I don't know if we have them in the same order.
Yeah, that's going to be...
Who wants to go first?
I'll let you go ahead and see what you've got there for number 2. We'll see if it matches up with my number 2 or my number 1.
At my number 2, it's the villainous venue that if somebody just out on the street is asked, hey, where do Bond villains live? This is what they answer. The first thing anybody thinks of for Bond villains, for any kind of self-respecting megalomaniac in any sort of movie, this is what they aspire to. This is the be-all, end-all template of, yeah. And this is something that was invented from whole cloth by the people at Eon when they realized that the place that the villain worked out of in the book wasn't really viable as a real location. So, when you can't use something as simple as a Japanese castle on the coast, what do? You get a frickin' volcano fort! From You Only Live Twice, the Volcano Fort of Blofeld is my number 2 choice for top villainous venue.
All right. I will say that, so your number 2 is actually my number 1. The Volcano Fort from You Only Live Twice is fantastic. Like you said, it is the preeminent, what people think of as a Bond villain lair, which is why it's number 1 for me, even though my number 2, which is probably your number 1, might be just a little bit cooler, especially to us. But, the Volcano Fort. I mean, and you know what's funny is this one gets a lot of heck from people too. There's a lot of people out there like, oh, it's so ridiculous. I hate the Volcano Fort.
Well, yeah, if you launch a rocket out of it, everyone in it's going to die. But
oh, yeah, of course. But I still love it. And like you said, I mean, it really comes down to you ask somebody, where does the Bond villain live? And they're going to say, oh, Hollowed Out Volcano. You know, because that's what you automatically assume. Doesn't matter how many different types of venues have actually been used throughout the series. Hollowed Out Volcano is always going to be the first one on anybody's mind. And so that's, for me, why it ended up being number 1. So,
and it's got piranhas. Not sharks, but piranhas. Those count.
If it had sharks, would it be your number 1?
No, it still would be my number 1. Because there's really only one thing that you can do, to my mind, that's even cooler than a hollowed out volcano.
And what would that be?
It's not a volcano. It's no moon. It's a space station. The frickin' space station from Moonraker. Why? Because it's a space station.
Pew,
That's
pew.
why.
Pew, pew. Yes, that is also my number 2. So, yeah, our number 1 and number 2 are both the same, just flip-flopped spaces. But other than that, perfect match. Yes, this space station was awesome. I mean, first of all, it's a space station. Second, it's a frickin' space station. Third, it was an awesome space station. It was really cool. It was really well done. And, despite the fact that, I mean, yeah, looking back now, especially with a lot of the movies that have been made that feature weightlessness in scenes, yeah, the weightless scenes just stunk in that movie. But that wasn't the fault of the space station. That was the movie making of the time. They basically, okay, if you move really slow, people will assume you're weightless.
I mean, they did a great job putting this
together.
Absolutely,
yes. No, the space station was a fantastic set. It was put to fantastic use in the film. I mean, yeah, it wasn't realistic in any way, shape, or form. But this is Bond. Who cares about realism? That's not what we're here for. I mean, we've already decided that we're doing this on a space station. We've thrown reason and logic out the window. We're going to the good stuff now. Well, let's just have some fun. And Moonraker is a fun movie, and a big part of that fun is the fact that the climax takes place on a frickin' space station.
Yeah, it's a space station. It's awesome. And it's not even, yeah, it's corny, but it's corny just on the right side of the shark. It doesn't jump over it.
It's swimming alongside the shark. It's watching the shark. It's thinking, I could possibly
It's a shark that does have a laser mounted on it.
Yeah, there you go.
Is the shark.
But, yeah, that space station was awesome. That whole movie's awesome. I mean, we talk about Moonraker a lot on these shows because it is one of those ones that you can go back to time and time again and just rewatch and just find something more fantastic about it each and every time. Is it the best movie ever made? No. Is it the best even Bond movie ever made? No. But it's a great movie. It's fantastic, and I definitely highly recommend anyone who hasn't checked out Moonraker yet for whatever reason, go check it out. Do it.
It's tons of fun. And Come on, space station. But whether you agree with me that the space station's just a little bit cooler, or whether you agree with Eric that the Volcano Fort is totally where it's at, I mean, they're both great. And Bond has had lots of great villainous venues he's had to invade. Is there any that he hasn't invaded that you'd like to see him go for?
Oh, man, it's tough to think of. I mean, once you get past, I mean, they've already done a space station. They've already done a volcano, for crying out loud. I think underground is pretty much covered already. Underwater has been covered already. Space has been covered already. I mean, really, the only thing you could do would be like on the surface of another planet or on the surface of the moon or something like that. That would be, different enough to get crazy. But I wouldn't mind seeing like a real castle, like a real castle being used in that way. That could be fun. But,
I mean, one that isn't just filled with underage girls trying to seduce him?
Exactly.
That was from the Casino Royale parody, by the way, for those who didn't get that reference.
It's weird. I wonder what they could do next. I keep thinking, like, there's been so many movies now. It's boggling to think of what they would have to come up with next in order to
I would like
make
to
something.
see a castle, like you said, but another thing that I would like to see them attempt is what they skipped in order to get the Volcano Fort. I mean, yeah, it's not real, but Blofeld's Castle of Death in Japan, which isn't just a standard European-type medieval castle, which I'd like to see. Neuschwanstein would be kind of cool, actually. But just the idea of a castle of death, where you have things like a garden full of poisonous shit that you have to go through, and maybe throw in kind of like an extension of the high-fat karate school, like a Bruce Lee-style pagoda of death that you have to go up in this Japanese castle, I think would be really cool.
How about an American Gladiator-style arena? No.
Only if they get to the Spy Who Loved Me stage again. It's tough to think of what they haven't done already, and I don't want them just to do something different just for the sake of doing something different. I think they've got something really good going on with the series right now, and I'd rather they just do cool things with ordinary locations than come out with any crazy locations, unless the crazy location really fits the story and really moves the story along. If it really moves the story along and like fits in well, then by all means, throw me a crazy location. But if it's just, hey, we're going to be crazy for the sake of being crazy, no, save it for the story. Yeah, though, if we could put Daniel Craig in a Volcano Fort, I'd be interested.
It would be interesting. It would be interesting to see what they could do. I mean, obviously, the movie-making technology is there. They could definitely do it and make it look awesome. But would they get around the logistics of it? Would they try to make it make sense? Or would they go ahead and just be like, okay, it's a volcano fort. Get over it.
I'm guessing somewhere in between.
Well, all right. So,
but before we go, there is one more thing I do want to bring up.
Okay.
Because the release of this episode is as close as we're going to get to the 1-year anniversary of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast.
Oh.
And I would just like to say thank you to all of our audience members, whether you've been listening to us from the beginning for the entirety of the past year, or whether you caught up with us along the way. We're really, really glad you're here. We really appreciate it. We could not do this without you. We wouldn't want to do this without you. And because of you, we have consistently been and continue to be one of the more successful shows on the Four Eyed Radio Network. So that's all you guys. Really, really appreciate it.
Yes.
It's been great doing the show, and we have lots more to come, so we look forward to entertaining you for a long time on.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks again to all of our listeners, and hey, tell a friend. Bring somebody else into the Bond universe and get them listening to the show too. That'd be fantastic. And of course, as always, we are available to you, our listeners, to converse with, to ask us questions, to give us talking points that maybe we hadn't considered or maybe we haven't mentioned. We're available online. Obviously, our website, hermajestyspod.com. You can comment on any of the episodes there. I'm also available by email at Eric at hermajestyspod.com, and on Twitter at Eric J. Dewey. And of course, the show's Twitter is at hermajestyspod. You can on the Twitters as well.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at CinemaOTR. You can also email me directly, Ziggy at cinemaontherocks.com, or you can also visit my website, cinemaontherocks.com, where you can find reviews for just about every Bond movie out there and lots more, including short films, web series, interviews I've done. So by all means, check that out as well.
It's good stuff.
And we also look forward to checking out our next episode for Majesty's Secret Podcast, when we'll be talking about Bond's buddies. No, not the Bond Girls episode. We just did that one. We're talking about Bond's allies in the series. So, Moneypenny, Felix, and lots of other folks. That's who we'll be talking about next time on Her Majesty's Secret Podcast. But for right now, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network.
This has been another great presentation by the Four-Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at foureyedradio.com.